There is a prophecy in an ancient book that describes the death of Jesus of Nazareth before Jesus of Nazareth existed. Not in vague poetic language, not in symbols and metaphors, in direct speech. The prophecy puts words in the mouths of the men who would kill the righteous one, words the chief priests at the cross would say almost verbatim. Same verb, same conditional, same theological taunt. This prophecy sat inside the Christian Bible for 1,600 years, and most modern Protestants have never been told it exists. The book is called The Wisdom of Solomon. It was written in Greek in Alexandria, somewhere around 100 years before the cross. It is not in most Protestant Bibles today. It sits in every Catholic and Orthodox Bible. And in its second chapter, it contains a prophecy so specific that the Gospel writers borrowed its language word for word when they described the day Jesus died. Today, we read what the early church called the most haunting prophecy of the cross. Start with the book itself. The Wisdom of Solomon belongs to a collection Christians have known by many names: the Apocrypha, the deuterocanonical books, the anaginoskomena, the Greek word the Orthodox Church still uses, which simply means the things to be read. It is the same collection that holds the additions to Esther, the books of the Maccabees, the wisdom of Sirach, Tobit, and Judith. Roughly 15 books, depending on how you count. They were preserved in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that the early church read. The Wisdom of Solomon is written in the persona of Solomon himself. The opening verses imagine the king of Israel writing to the kings of the earth. The voice is unmistakable. The same kind of poetic instruction that fills the book of Proverbs. But scholars are almost unanimous that this is not Solomon writing in the 10th century BC. The Greek is too late. The vocabulary is too Hellenistic. The philosophical references are too clearly drawn from the Greek world. The book was written by a Greek-speaking Jew in Alexandria, somewhere between roughly 100 BC and 50 BC, writing in Solomon's voice to give wisdom teaching the weight of the king's authority. That kind of authorial choice was common in the ancient world. The book of Hebrews is anonymous. The Psalms attributed to David include many that were clearly written long after David. Pseudonymous wisdom writing under the name of a famous sage, was the standard literary form for this kind of teaching in Hellenistic Judaism. The book itself divides into 3 movements. The first part, chapters 1 through 5, is a long meditation on the difference between the righteous and the wicked, with particular attention to what happens to the righteous when the wicked persecute them. The second part, chapters 6 through 10, is a hymn to wisdom personified, who is described as the emanation of God's glory, the image of His goodness, and the active agent of God in the world. The third part, chapters 11 through 19, is a retelling of the Exodus, comparing the wisdom of God toward Israel with His judgment on Egypt. But here is the detail most modern Protestants never learn. The New Testament writers knew this book and quoted it. Paul's argument in Romans 1 about pagan idolatry echoes Wisdom 13 and 14 line by line. The famous opening of Hebrews, that the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact imprint of His being, uses the same rare Greek vocabulary that Wisdom 7:26 uses to describe wisdom herself. Paul's image of the armor of God in Ephesians 6 reads almost like a recasting of Wisdom 5:17 through 20. It is the book the apostles read. It is the book they expected their readers to know. For 1,600 years, every major Christian Bible contained it. Luther kept it in his 1534 German Bible in a separate Apocrypha section. And the King James of 1611 did the same. If you had opened a KJV in 1611, you would have found the Wisdom of Solomon sitting between Malachi and Matthew, alongside Esther's additions and the rest of the Deuterocanon. The British and Foreign Bible Society dropped the section in 1804, and most modern Protestant Bibles have not carried it since. The complete absence is only about 140 years old. Now to the prophecy itself. Chapter 2 of the Wisdom of Solomon opens with a long monologue placed in the mouth of the wicked. The structure is dramatic, and the wicked are speaking to themselves. They argue that life is short, that death is final, that pleasure is the only good, and that the strong should crush the weak before they themselves are crushed. And then, in verse 12, the speech turns. The wicked notice that there is a righteous man among them, and they begin to plot against him. Listen to the text. This is Wisdom 2, verses 12 through 20. Therefore, let us lie in wait for the righteous, because he is not for our turn, and he is clean contrary to our doings. He upbraideth us with our offending the law, and objecteth to our infamy the transgressings of our education. He professeth to have the knowledge of God, and he calleth himself the child of the Lord. He was made to reprove our thoughts. He is grievous unto us even to behold, for his life is not like other men's, his ways are of another fashion. We are esteemed of him as counterfeits. He abstaineth from our ways as from filthiness. He pronounceth the end of the just to be blessed, and maketh his boast that God is his Father. Let us see if his words be true, and let us prove what shall happen in the end of him. For if the just man be the Son of God, he will help him, and deliver him from the hand of his enemies. Let us examine him with despitefulness and torture, that we may know his meekness, and prove his patience. Let us condemn him with a shameful death, for by his own saying he shall be respected. Read that slowly. A righteous man. He calls himself God's Son. And the wicked decide they will test him. They will examine him with torture. They will see whether God really rescues him. They will condemn him to a shameful death. And the reason they give is that if he really is the Son of God, God will save him. This was written more than 100 years before the cross. The Greek phrase translated shameful death is thanatō aschēmoni, death with a shape that is unseemly, dishonorable, outside the bounds of what a worthy man's end should look like. The root word aschēmon means literally without form, without shape, a death that disfigures, a death that strips the man of all dignity. In Greco-Roman culture, certain deaths carried this category by definition. Crucifixion was the chief among them. Cicero called the cross the most cruel and disgusting penalty, a punishment so shameful that he said the word crux should never even pass the lips of a Roman citizen. The author of Wisdom is not predicting a generic execution. He is naming a specific kind of death, and the kind he names is the kind the Romans would use on a Galilean preacher who claimed to be the Son of God. But there is another detail in the prophecy worth noticing. The wicked do not condemn the righteous man because he is violent. They do not condemn him because he is dangerous. They condemn him because his very existence rebukes them. His life is not like other men's. His ways are of another fashion. He pronounces the end of the just to be blessed. He claims God as his Father. And that is enough. That is the script the wicked have already written before the Gospels begin. Now turn to Matthew chapter 27. The scene is the crucifixion. Jesus has been condemned, scourged, and nailed to the cross. The chief priests are mocking him. They want him dead. They are gathered around the foot of the cross, and Matthew records what they say. Verse 39 begins it. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests mocking him, with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him." And then, verse 43, the line that has stopped scholars cold for nearly 2,000 years. "He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God." Now go back to Wisdom 2:18. "For if the just man be the Son of God, he will help him, and deliver him from the hand of his enemies." And the Greek is closer than the English. The verb to deliver in Matthew 27 verse 43 is rhisastho, the aorist imperative form of rhuomai, to rescue, to pull out of danger. The verb in Wisdom 2 verse 18 is rhisetai, the future indicative form of the same verb. Same word, same root, same theological logic. And both passages frame the action with the same conditional. If he be the Son of God. He said, I am the Son of God. This is not a paraphrase. This is not a loose allusion. Matthew is reaching into Wisdom 2 and pulling the words of the wicked into the mouths of the chief priests. The mockers at the cross are speaking the script that Wisdom of Solomon wrote a century earlier. Most New Testament scholars across every tradition agree on this. The parallel is too close to be accidental. The vocabulary lines up, the grammar lines up, the theological logic lines up. Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and Jewish scholars almost uniformly recognize Wisdom 2 as a source behind the language of Matthew chapter 27. What they disagree about is the direction of the influence. Some argue that Matthew is consciously evoking Wisdom of Solomon, writing the crucifixion scene in language that would awaken the prophecy in the reader's ear. Others argue that the chief priests themselves, immersed in the Septuagint, would have known Wisdom 2 and used its language at the cross as a deliberate taunt. Others argue that the prophecy was so embedded in Hellenistic Jewish culture that it shaped how the gospel writers heard the actual events. But the parallel itself is not in dispute, and the meaning for the early church was electric. The Book of Wisdom, read in every Christian congregation, preached on by the Church Fathers, included in every major Bible for the first 1,600 years of Christian history, described in advance the moment when the righteous one would be condemned, tortured, and killed by men who said God should rescue him if he was truly God's Son. That moment came, and the Gospel writers recorded it in words drawn from the prophecy itself. This is what the early church heard, and this is why the book mattered to them. But you might be thinking, we already have prophecies about the crucifixion. Isaiah 53, Psalm 22, the whole long thread of the suffering servant and the rejected one. Every Christian knows these texts. Every Easter sermon walks through them. Why does Wisdom 2 matter when we already have Isaiah? The answer is in what each prophecy paints. Isaiah 53 paints the suffering. It is the most quoted Old Testament chapter about the cross. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The Hebrew word for sorrows is makovot, from makov, the kind of physical anguish that bends a person over. The chapter continues. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. As a lamb to the slaughter, cut off from the land of the living, numbered with the transgressors, bearing the sin of many. That is the prophecy of the suffering itself. Psalm 22 paints the moment of abandonment. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The exact opening line that Jesus quotes from the cross. The psalm goes on to describe the mockers. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Then the body. They pierced my hands and my feet. Then the lots cast for the clothing. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture. That is the prophecy of the scene at the cross. And then there is wisdom 2. Wisdom 2 does not paint the suffering. It does not paint the scene. Wisdom 2 paints the logic of the people who killed him. Isaiah tells you what was done. Psalm 22 tells you what was said and seen. Wisdom 2 tells you why. It walks inside the heads of the men who condemned the righteous one and shows you how they reasoned themselves into the killing. He claims to be God's son. Let us see whether God will help him. Let us condemn him with a shameful death. That is the missing piece. You can read Isaiah and feel the weight of the suffering. You can read Psalm 22 and see the scene. But until you read Wisdom 2, you do not have the inner monologue of the people who put him there. You do not have their theology of the test. You do not have their cynical use of the title Son of God to mean, let God prove it. But without that piece, the mockery at the cross can sound like spontaneous cruelty rather than the literal repetition of an older script. The early church read these 3 texts together: Isaiah for the suffering, Psalm 22 for the scene, Wisdom 2 for the logic. Cyprian of Carthage quoted Wisdom 2 in his Testimonies under the heading that he is the righteous one whom the Jews should put to death. And Augustine, in his City of God, wrote that in the Wisdom of Solomon, the Passion of Christ is most openly prophesied. For 1,000 years, the 3 texts sat side by side in the Christian imagination. And then, for many Christians, one of the 3 quietly disappeared from the page. There is one more piece: the aftermath. The prophecy in Wisdom 2 does not end with the death of the righteous one. The book waits 3 chapters and then comes back to the same man. Chapter 5 picks up the story after the killing. The wicked have done what they planned to do. The righteous one is dead. And then, the reversal. Listen to Wisdom 5, verses 1 through 5. Then shall the righteous man stand in great boldness before the face of such as have afflicted him, and made no account of his labors. When they see it, they shall be troubled with terrible fear, and shall be amazed at the strangeness of his salvation, so far beyond all that they looked for. And they, repenting and groaning for anguish of spirit, shall say within themselves, This was he, whom we had sometimes in derision, and a proverb of reproach. We fools accounted his life madness, and his end to be without honor. How is he numbered among the children of God, and his lot is among the saints? Read that and try not to hear the resurrection. The righteous man, dead by their hand, stands again before them. Their hearts collapse. They cannot understand what they are seeing. The Greek word translated strangeness of his salvation is paradoxon. Paradox, the thing beyond expectation. The vindicated one is now numbered among the children of God. His lot is among the saints. But the wicked, who once mocked his life, now understand too late. This is the same theology Isaiah ends with. He shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. The suffering servant is exalted after the suffering. Wisdom 2 and 5 follow the same shape. Death by the wicked, vindication by God. And the early church read this passage the way they read Wisdom 2, not as a generic statement about the resurrection of the righteous, as a specific portrait of the vindication of the one righteous man at the center of history. But there are 2 ways to read all of this. One reading is the skeptical reading. Matthew read the wisdom of Solomon. He modeled the crucifixion scene on its language. And the chief priests in his telling speak the words wisdom too had already put into the mouths of the wicked. The structure is literary. The fulfillment is constructed. The other reading is the believing reading. The wisdom of Solomon is older than the cross, and the Spirit that gave words to the prophets gave words to this book also. The prophecy stood for a century, waiting. When the moment came, the wicked spoke the script, because the script had always been theirs to speak. The fulfillment is real. For nearly 2,000 years, the Church has been able to read it either way. The text sits on the page, and the parallels are what they are. The choice between literary construction and prophetic fulfillment has been left to the reader. What the Church did not do for 16 centuries was hide the parallel itself. There is a prophecy in the Bible that reads like an eyewitness account of the crucifixion. It was written more than 100 years before Jesus was born. It sat inside the Christian Bible for 1,600 years. It is still in the Bibles of most Christians in the world today. The early church read it as a prophecy of Christ. The chief priests at the cross spoke its language as they mocked him. And for many modern Protestants, it is the prophecy nobody has ever told them about. You do not have to accept the wisdom of Solomon as canonical to find it worth reading. You do not have to believe it was inspired to see that the first Christians believed it was prophetic. The question is not whether Jesus fulfilled this prophecy. The question is whether you have ever been given the chance to see it. If this opened something for you, share it with someone who has never heard the prophecy in Wisdom of Solomon. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the wider biblical inheritance. Leave one word in the comments, even one. As always, God bless you.